One of the things that Genshin Impact does that I'll never really understand is release characters that only fill certain niches. For the people that use those niches, they're good, but generally these characters are never going to be used by people outside of those niches. Some examples are Kujosar being an Electro buffer at C6, Goru being a Geo buffer, Candace being a Hydro infuser and a normal attack buffer, and more. Then there are some characters with hyper-specific niches, like Kaveh being a Bloom DPS and Chevreuse buffing Overloaded if the team consists of only Pyro and Electro characters. But in my opinion, the worst niche-specific character in the game is Mika. Outside of his main niche, which we'll get into, he can heal using his burst, but his burst only heals if the character you're using hits an enemy with their normal attacks, which is pretty specific and can be better done by a lot of other healers, including other 4-star ones. As for his niche, he's a physical damage buffer. You know, the worst damage type in the game. Sure, if you're using a physical damage character, then he's a great character for that, but outside of that specific scenario, he sucks. He's also not a strong character at all, so that makes me wonder how he would do on his own. Now, there are a lot of other things that I don't like about Mika, so much so that he's one of my least favorite characters in the game. But I know that some people clicking on this are probably Mika fans, so I'm going to go into this challenge objectively, and I'm gonna try not to shit on him that much. Just know, you've been warned. Here are the rules. I can only use Mika in battle. Any puzzles that require another element can be completed with another character. No fighting enemies in co-op, and all pole arms are allowed. Also, no healing items in battle, I forgot to say that. This will be my final challenge that ends at Fontaine. After this challenge, Natlan Act 5 will mark the end of every challenge until the next Regions Arc Conquests come out. Also, I started this challenge as a milestone for reaching 50k. Never mind the fact that I'm almost at 60k. Thank you for helping me reach this milestone, and please enjoy my suffering as I try to beat Genshin Impact using only Mika. We start our journey by pulling Mika, which I surprisingly have the footage for. This is 5 solo challenges in a row where I've had the footage of me pulling the character. First is Amber's domain, and we quickly skipped it by climbing on a rock and gliding to the Door of Resurrection. Next is Kaya's domain, which had simple enemies and we could ice platform instead of ice bridge. The game taunts me by giving us Kaya, an actually strong cryo character, but we have to stay with Mika. Last is Lisa's domain, which we could also skip by jumping off an invisible platform. That's where Act 1 ends, and now we need to reach AR10 to start Act 2. This is usually where I go over a character's pros and cons, so let's do that with Mika. We'll start with the pros. I did kinda talk bad about his healing burst, but it's nice to have in a solo challenge. After you deploy it, it only heals when your active character uses normal attacks, and because of stuff that I'll get into later, that's good because we're mainly using physical damage for this playthrough. His first passive talent also buffs physical attacks, which is, in my opinion, the main reason somebody would use him. His utility passive shows where Mondstadt and regional specialties are on the map, which is handy for farming wolf hooks, which are his enemy drops. That's all the pros, now the cons. Everything else about his kit. His burst deals no damage. Other healing bursts, like Diona's, Jean's, Dory's, and more, while they do mainly focus on healing, they still have deployment damage and sometimes still can deal passive damage after deploying it. Why would they make Mika's burst do no damage? Now yes, Barbara is another character that deals no damage with her burst, but I have the same problem with her burst that I do with Mika's. His burst also has a recharge requirement of 70, which is pretty high for it dealing no damage. Thankfully, his elemental skill generates quite a bit of particles. Every 15 seconds. Why is his cooldown that long too? Not to mention that all of his attacks are just weak. His normal attacks don't scale very high, his elemental skill might as well not even be a damage option, and his burst...
Leave the wounded to me! Should we reconsider our tactics?
Also, his second passive talent is kinda just the worst version of his first passive talent. His boss is also for some reason the C-Tech Weenut. It's not a hard boss, but we'll have to travel all the way to the Sumeru Desert just to fight it. That's all the cons, and honestly with that kind of list of cons, I'm scared for this challenge. Also, this is not to say Mika is a bad character. He is 100% a character that excels in his niche, and you should pretty much use him only as a support. However, I can't do that because this is a solo challenge. I pretty much have to build him as a DPS because he's the only character I can use. All of this is to say, this challenge is going to suck. To reach AR10, I did a lot of Mondstadt exploration and adventure handbook quests. Even now I can notice Mika's lack of damage output. Pretty soon we reached AR10 and got a 10 pull on standard banner. All we got from these pulls were a Widsith, a Yanfei, and a Noelle. 3 things I can't use. There's not going to be much for us to pull from this challenge as there's only 2 4-star pull arms on the standard banner. A Favonius Lance might work, but I'm mainly interested in White Tassel and Crescent Pike. White Tassel is a 3-star weapon that you can get by opening chests in Liyue, and this weapon increases your crit rate and normal attack power, and Crescent Pike is a craftable weapon that gives you physical damage bonus. We do a bit more grinding and reach AR11, and then we start Act 2. We meet Venti, who takes us to Windrise to fight an Eye of the Storm. We can't really hit it when it flies up because I want to save my elemental skill for when I can stun it. It was a little slow, but pretty easy. We steal the Holy Lyre and then meet a much cooler Mondstadt character. He takes us to the Fatui hideout, and at the end of that domain we fight a Fatui agent. I think Mika might have been influenced by Dia constantly missing her normal attacks, so he tried it out for himself here. Hopefully that doesn't happen more in future fights. Next is the Ruin Guard, and you can probably imagine how this went. We can only deal elemental damage every 15 seconds, so we just have to slowly take him down with our normal attacks. I was surprisingly able to stun him with my elemental skill, but it's not like it made this fight any faster. This fight took nearly 4 minutes, and for being this early in the game, that's terrifying. Next is the domain, and this finally gives us a moment to breathe. Nothing was that difficult, and we could easily take down the Abyss Mage's shield using the water in the room.
They are communicating. Huh?
Soon after that, Act 2 is done. The much better short male character with a kind of weird haircut. Now we need to reach AR 18 to start Act 3. Around this time we unlock commissions, which are a great source of experience, so we'll be doing them every chance we get. The best thing to do for experience this early on is just random exploration and doing things as you unlock them, like domains or story quests. Soon after reaching AR 15, I went to Liyue and did a poll. Why would you do this to me?
The great astrologist Mona.
Why would you do this to me? Am I gonna start a collection of characters I don't like? For reaching AR 15, we can ascend Mika, but I also ascended all my other characters to get a free pull from them. What did I get from these pulls?
Favonius Lance. Favonius Lance. Favonius Lance. Give me the Favonius Lance. That is not the Favonius Lance. It couldn't even have been a polearm. There's no sacrificial polearm.
The weapon I'm using right now is Dragon's Bane, but I intend to switch it out as soon as I get the White Tassel. As for artifacts, we have 2-piece Martial Artist and 2-piece Berserker. I still haven't gotten a physical damage bonus goblet, but I'll probably get one soon. Right? I do some more Mondstadt exploration, including doing the 3 barrier quests in Darupa Gorge, and that gets us a few more pulls.
Favonius Lance. Yes, Favonius Lance first try. Okay, wishing is now, useless on this account.
Well, this pretty much makes wishing obsolete. Favonius Lance will be our stand-in until we get one of the 2 weapons that I mentioned earlier. We got the last bit of experience we needed by repeatedly doing Cecilia Garden, a domain in Mondstadt that gives you 100 experience every time you complete it. Now we're at AR 18 and we can start Act 3. This quest starts with a Hydro Abyss Mage. Using the Cryoflowers nearby, we could pretty much immobilize it until it lost its shield. Inside Stormterror's lair, we need to trigger 3 light actuators to fight Dvalin, and one of them requires us to fight a Pyro Abyss Mage and 2 Summitrals. I've heard a few people say that Cryo is the best element to deal with Abyss Mage shields, but I thoroughly disagree with that. Sure, it can freeze the Hydro Mages, but other than that, it doesn't do much to a lot of the Abyss Mage's shields. In my opinion, Anemo is still the best for them. Last is Dvalin. I'll give Mika this. He almost one-phased Dvalin. Really though, I knew he wouldn't one-phase Dvalin going into this fight. Now Mondstadt Act 3 is over.
It was a delay. It was going to be a character who's going to be another lame cryo character. Nice.
Now I need to reach AR 23 to start Liyue Act 1. I started this AR grind by doing some Liyue exploration, namely doing world quests like the Chi of Yore and the Trio Stands Alone, and I also did some Mondstadt domains, and I'm shocked I managed to do this one in particular. While doing the Trio Stands Alone, I finally got White Tassel. In case you need a refresher, White Tassel gives crit rate and increases your normal attack power, which is great because we're mainly using our normal attacks for this challenge. I then started to do Spiral Abyss before realizing there's pretty much no point because I've already gotten both the 4-star polearms you can get from Standard Banner, and it'd be very unlikely for me to get a Mika constellation. After a bit more Liyue exploration, I started doing my backlog of story quests. I did Kaya's story quest, Amber's story quest, Lisa's story quest, and Diluc's story quest. Right after we completed Diluc's story quest, we reached AR 23.
Thank you, King.
And now we can start Act 3. Rex Lapis dies, and Child tells us to inform the Adepti of his passing. First is Mooncarver, and normally his energy recharge buff is useful in this fight, but our burst deals no damage, so we're pretty much on our own against 20 Millilith soldiers. Thankfully, it only took around a minute and a half, but it probably would have been a lot faster if our burst dealt damage. For Mountain Shaper, we have to find this guy's brother in the amber, and fitting with how my luck has been throughout this challenge so far, I found him on the last possible piece of amber. Next is Cloud Retainer, who we made some food for before skipping her domain by jumping off a tree. Last is Zhao, and in this part of the quest we have to fight a Ruin Hunter. Not that hard, just a little slow. That's the end of Act 1, and now we need to reach AR 25 to start Act 2. I started this grind by doing Razor Story quest, and the Wolf of the North wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, probably because our Mika is being built physically. I then started to make the long trek through Sumeru to Mika's boss. It took over 40 minutes to reach it, but at least I have Sumeru unlocked for when I have to do it in the Archon quest. Mika's boss is for some reason the Weenut, which makes all the sense in the world to me. It's not that difficult of a boss at all, and its attacks are pretty slow and easy to telegraph. What's slightly annoying about it is how much HP it has and how often it goes underground, leading to this fight taking longer than I would have liked. A few runs of Trial Grounds of Thunder later and we're at AR 25 so we can do the Ascension domain, which is easy because all the enemies are hilly trolls. Now time for Act 2. We meet the man with a much more pleasant voice who takes us to Mondstadt to boil some rocks, and while there we fought some hilly trolls. Because Mika's crossbow is just so reliable, I had a pretty tough time with the Geosummitral. Later we go inside Granny's teapot and fight a bunch of slimes. The big cryo slime would have been a bit more difficult if there weren't a bunch of exploding pyro flowers around. They're still a little bit annoying as I had to lead them into the flowers. Hey Zhongli, what's your favorite Nintendo console?
It is not we.
At the Guizhong Ballista we have to fight a few treasure hoarders. It was raining, which made the Electro treasure hoarders 10 times more annoying, but outside of that, it wasn't too bad. That's the end of Act 2. Now we need to reach AR 28 to start Act 3. I spent a lot of this grind exploring the 3 ruins in Lisha, as they offer a lot of easy to collect chests, and for getting the nameless treasure from all of the ruins, you get 350 experience. In the World Quest Luhua Landscapes, I had the closest time trial of my life. You have to defeat 3 Abyss Mages in 1 minute, and I am shocked Mika managed to do this. Geo Traveler was here because you have to trigger a Geo Monument to start the trial. After that I decided to fight Mika's boss for when we reach AR 30. Still pretty easy, just a little slow. We're almost at AR 28, so I went to the temple in Lisha to do the 3 time trials there. We managed to do all of them, with a little bit of difficulty in the combat trial, and claiming our rewards gets us the rest of the experience we needed to reach AR 28 and start Act 3. We activate the windmill mechanism in the mountains with Sucrose, and then we go to the Guizhong Ballista to fight the Millith. Clearly Mika stayed more
Battle ready.
than them because they were easy. Later we needed to sing some flowers for Zhongli, which causes 3 cryo water flowers to appear. And let me tell you, this was horrible. Mika struggled to launch any of them before they got into the ground, so I couldn't drown them in time before they started to charge for their projectiles. When I would target one of them, another one would begin charging for their projectiles, and when they got their projectiles I would just have to run because if I didn't, I would probably die. I used my healing burst, and soon after using it, the healing was cancelled out because of how hard it is to dodge all 3 of them. I didn't die, somehow, but I was pretty close to. Next is Child. Mika is pretty easily able to pressure Child into the first and second phases with his normal attacks, and the third phase is just never really that hard. A gripe that I have with this fight is that the only way you'll see him do his stronger and better attacks is if he applies you with Riptide, which can only happen if you get hit with one of his attacks. It's pretty rare that this will ever happen because they're pretty easily telegraphed and they're very slow, and even sometimes after you get applied with a Riptide, he just won't use one of his stronger moves. I wish this fight was more difficult, as very few challenges I've ever done has actually struggled with this fight. Last is Osial, which is always easy because of the buffs that you get during the fight. That's the end of Liu Act 3. Now we need to reach AR 30 and complete both Danes of Quest to start Inazuma. Danes of Quest naturally mean Abyss enemies, and for these two, a lot of Abyss Mages. I would explain why Abyss Mages are painful to fight, but look at this footage. Does this look fun? It especially sucked when they were paired with other enemies, like 2 Shield Wall Miner Trolls in the World Quest and a Ruin Hunter in the Archon Quest. Speaking of the Ruin Hunter fight, that gave us our first death of the playthrough. It was bound to happen sooner or later with how lackluster our healing has been. After completing We Will Be Reunited, I went to the Trial Grounds of Thunder to get the rest of the experience I needed to reach AR 30. Now that we're AR 30, we can start the Inazuma Prologue Quest, which only had treasure hoarders and slimes, which were pretty easy. Now time for Inazuma Act 1. The first combat section is the Transport Mission, which has us fight treasure hoarders and Ronin. Out of curiosity, I compared how long this fight took in this challenge to other challenges, and I realized it took longer than Kirara only and almost as long as no artifacts. Mika's really lacking in damage output. Way later in the Archon Quest, we have to fight a bunch of Tenryar Commission soldiers. It's only really when going through the footage that I learned just how much HP I lose during fights on average. If I hadn't healed in between fights and during fights with my burst, I probably would have died once or twice. That's where Act 1 ends, and now we need to do Ayaka's and Yoimiya's story quest to start Act 2. And nothing important happens during these quests, but before starting Act 2 I grinded to ascend my weapon, that weapon still being White Tassel. Right when I started the grind, Mika got double teamed by a cryo whopper flower and an agent, which obviously led to his second death. Either way, once I got done grinding for Mika's weapon, we started Act 2, which starts with us fighting the Raiden Shogun. Kinda. Not really. Later we go to the resistance camp with the Virgin to do some archery demonstration. While Mika does have a crossbow and can hit the turrets, his cooldown is way too long to get even close to completing this. I still tried it for fun and to see how poorly he would do, and he only got to dummy number 6. We just called on a much more competent Knight of Favonius to do it for us. At the front lines we fight more Tanner Commission soldiers in some very intense and interactive fights. Before starting Act 3 I decided it was time to upgrade my weapon. White Tassel's been doing a pretty good job, but I feel like we might be able to get something better, that being Crescent Pike, a craftable polearm that increases your physical damage bonus. I had been passively grinding for ores throughout the challenge, so it didn't take long before I had materials necessary to craft it. Once I had it leveled, it was time to test if it was better. It was honestly kinda hard to tell, but I ended up switching to Crescent Pike. Physical damage bonus will really help our normal attacks, and by the way, I still haven't even gotten a 3-star physical damage goblet. Act 3 starts with us fighting some run-in around Watatsumi Island. I can already tell in these fights that our power is indeed increased now that we've gotten Crescent Pike. Later we need to trigger 3 Electro Monuments to fight a Thunderhelm Lawachurl, and if you couldn't tell throughout the video, Mika is indeed not Electro, so we use Lisa to trigger them. This was an easy fight, as he didn't even hit us once. Mika executes the Virgin, and now we need to do the Delusion Factory. In this domain, with enemies like the Animo Boxer, Electro Hammer Guy, and the Electro Chisin Mage, I did not expect the Pyro Gun Guy to be the one to almost take us down. The domain isn't really that bad outside of that.
It's Friday morning. I'm just trying to enjoy my coffee, and I just come to realize I'm gonna be in Dublin next week with this guy.
Hey girlie, hold still.
I mean, I feel like we just taken it too far already. It's just...
I'm coming to Dublin!
We meet Yamiko, but who cares about her when there's...
It's so much better force than what the fuck I'm stuck with.
Now we have to fight an onslaught of Terminator Commission soldiers. Mika's first passive made this fight easier than it probably would have been, but that didn't stop us from almost dying. Now time for Senora. Despite being cryo, Phase 1 wasn't too bad. We just made sure to dodge her cryo attacks while wailing hits on her. Phase 2 was a little more difficult, but that was expected because I went into Phase 2 with only around 2000 HP. Overall, not as bad as I thought she would be, but not easy by any means. Next is the second Raiden fight, and because of how easy this fight is, I just try and see what my highest damage number is with all my buffs. The last time I did a cryo solo challenge was with Fremine, and he managed to deal 13k in this fight. What about Mika? I don't know what I was expecting. That's where Inazuma Act 3 ends. Now we need to reach AR-35 and do the Danes of Chasm quest to start Sumeru, but I lost all the footage I had for the Danes of Quest and the AR-35 grind, so I'll just recreate the Danes of Chasm quest footage. This was probably the worst Danes of Quest so far because of how many Abyss enemies were here. If you remember how these fights went in the previous Danes of Quest, you probably know how they went here. I had to fight 10 Abyss enemies, and they were all slow and boring. Now I can start Sumeru Act 1, but I also lost most of my Sumeru Act 1 footage, so I'll recreate that as well. The Hydrofungi at the Withering Zone were not too bad as we could freeze them all with our crossbow, and the Hilichurls in the Dream Domain also weren't that bad. We get our Akasha Terminal and then go to Port Ormos and meet Alhaitham. He has us buy some knowledge capsules from Dory, which we test on some fungi. Later we fight some Eremites at the dock, which were also pretty easy. Now I need to do Act 2, but this quest is all dialogue outside of one easy and simple Eremite fight, but at least the footage is back. Yippee! Act 3 starts with us meeting
the Doctor
before going into the forest to fight some more Eremites. Mika takes down enemies a lot slower and gets hit a lot more when they're in a group, and it just so happens that there were 9 Eremites we had to fight here, 3 per wave. It's not like the fight itself is difficult, it's just that it feels so slow. Later in the desert we fight some Rift Hounds. They're not too difficult to take down and their corrosion was pretty easily cancelled out by our healing. Next is Act 4, but before I started it, I grinded to get a 5-star and weapon banner. Which 5-star? Arlecchina's weapon. Tell me Bond of Life Mika doesn't sound hilarious. While grinding, Mika casually defeated a local legend, no big deal. After a long time of grinding, I finally got the 5-star. Finally, the 5-star. Absolution Mika. I've been saying the wrong weapon this entire time. I manifested that. I'm not even gonna be mad. We're just gonna go back to Act 4. This quest starts with another easy group of Eremites, and later at the Elazar Hospital we have to fight some Hilichurls, but they're way less scary than the Geolawachurl you have to fight here. This guy is pretty much the perfect counter to us. He has 70% physical resistance, a Geo Shield that we can only break easily by plunge attacking, and strong moves. Thankfully, our burst came in clutch multiple times throughout this fight, and we were able to beat him in only one attempt. Still took 2 minutes though. To trigger the 3 Dendro monuments, I grabbed a Dendrogram, quickly teleported and ran over to the monuments, and charge attacked them. I was pretty easily able to make it to all 3 of them individually. In the Mausoleum of King Deshret, there are a bunch of fungi groups, but we could skip most of them. The one potentially dangerous one that we couldn't skip wasn't that bad, but they got more hits on me than I would have liked. Now time for Act 5, which starts with even more easy Eremites. At Party CI, we have to fight some more Fatui soldiers, and here we encounter something I just love about Mika. Remember that 15-second cooldown? Yeah, because of that, we can't take down the Electro Hammer guy's shield. I mean, we could, but we'd just take him out with our normal attacks before that even gets close to happening. Also, the Pyro Gun guy is still being unusually mean this challenge. Way later, we have to go inside the Diaz Foundry and fight even more Fatui soldiers. The Electro Hammer guy fell off the platform, so I had to plunge down to kill it, and while trying to catch one of the platforms, it went away as I was going towards it. So I had to land on this inconspicuous pipe. So much went wrong within the span of 15 seconds. The second time through, the domain went a lot better. Now it's time to fight Scaramouche. I have the footage for Phase 1, but I paused the recording before starting Phase 2 because I had to do something and forgot to unpause, so I'll recreate and cover the important parts. Mika can hit the Nirvana engines, but he cannot destroy them because, say it with me, 15-second cooldown! In the polluted domain, the Electrolawachal kept respawning and getting all of its HP back while I was attacking it, which made me jump off the boat in anger, but once it stopped doing that, it wasn't that bad. That's the end of Sumeru Act 5. Now we need to reach AR40 and complete Caribert to start Fontaine. Normally Caribert isn't that interesting of an Archon quest, only having one fight worth talking about, and it's almost the same here. The one fight worth talking about is the fight against the Cryo Abyss Herald, and this is a fight I've been fearing for a very long time. Dodging his moves isn't that hard, except for when he's applied with Cryo, which changes the timing, which can throw me off. But it obviously takes absolutely forever to take down his Cryo Shield, even with physical damage bonus. This fight took 8.5 minutes, which isn't as bad as Kirara, but keep in mind Kirara was almost half of Mika's level. Oh yeah, and Yanfei was here because you need a pirate character to light the cooking pot near the beginning of the quest, and you can't switch characters out until you reach the Door of Resurrection, and it was real convenient that I just so happened to forget to switch her out. Just to prove that I did this entire fight with only Mika, I'll post the entire fight on Deadly D-Luke, my second account. Finally gives that account a reason to exist. Now we just need to reach AR40 to start Fontaine, and the first thing I did was fight the Weenut a few more times. Still easy, still slow, still boring, kill me. I then did some weekly bosses until I fought Signora and lost to her, at which point I said fuck it and went to Dragonspine. Dragonspine is in my opinion the best place to grind experience, but I haven't gone here yet because of the obvious, Mika's Cryo. The first thing we run into is a Cryo Lawachal, then a Ruin Greater, then another Cryo Lawachal. Yeah, you see why I didn't go here earlier? While here, I did one of the worst things I've ever done in a solo challenge. Early Genshin players, do you remember this time trial? Do you remember how everyone hated it? Well, I do too now because of this challenge. Most of the time trial is honestly not that bad, unless we don't crit with one of our Crimson Crystal shots, at which point we'll get permafrozen by the 2 Cryo Summon Trolls and die. Why do I play this game? It all falls apart at the 3 Cryo Abyss mages. I have to use Crimson Crystals to take down their shields, but sometimes I'll hit 2 of them at the same time with the crystal, and sometimes I won't. I really need my crystal to hit 2 of them at once, because at this point in the trial, I usually only have 2 minutes. It took me 12 attempts across 40 to 50 minutes to finally beat this time trial. That is up there with Ningguang doing the archery demonstration with one of the worst things I've ever had to do in a solo challenge. A lot more Dragonspine exploration and some Trial Guns of Thunder gets us to AR40, and it gets us another 5-star. Ningguang should have been a 5-star.
Hi there.
Every account except my main account I get Tainari.
And the main account that I want Tainari on is my main account. I think this account as a whole is a good example of what Mika's life is. Horrible. Now we can start Fontaine. We meet Linny and Lynette at Romaritime Harbor, and they want us to collect 3 Romaritime flowers for them, which we need Hydro to collect. Teleporting away and grabbing Hydrograna and then rushing over to the flowers to apply them with Hydro allows us to collect them. At the Court of Fontaine, we meet the other shy Cryo character as well as Child, who takes the only fight in Act 1, so let's skip to Act 2.
Mika's immune to
full damage! We investigate with Navia for a while, which leads us to this underwater domain filled with clockwork mecha. These guys are not too bad, and they were pretty easily stun locked. Something I don't understand is why Gardamex don't have at least a little physical resistance. They're made of metal like ruin automations, so why not? Acts 3 and 4 are spent entirely in the Fortress of Meripede with no combat, but before we move on to Act 5, why do we think Mika was in jail? It must have been for identity theft, stealing the identity of the Chocobo and Len. Act 5 starts with the tower domain. The first 2 fights are pretty much just 1v1s against an Animo rogue. The third fight is 3 Minotaurs. It's quite hard to dodge 3 Minotaurs swinging their axe all at the same time, so I took a lot of damage, even after healing myself. However, none of those fights are what I worried about. What I worry about the most is the 2 rogues and 1 ruin guard at the top of the tower. All tanky enemies, all strong, all in a small area, and we have to beat them all with just a Mika. The strategy I developed for this fight is to take one of them out at a time before you die to make it easier once you respawn. I usually only need to do this once so I can just fight the Ruin Guard and 1 rogue, but Mika had to do it twice because he's just so strong! Honestly, this fight wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but it still sucked and I had to use that cheap strategy. Really though, that's the last worry I have for this challenge. We only have 3 more fights left and all of them are usually easy. Later we put Farina on trial, which long story short led to us fighting 2 Hydro Gardamex. It's really a Mika move just to completely overshot one of the normal attacks out of nowhere, which is something he never did until now.
Just one more fight, just one more fight, just one more fight, just one more.
Last is the Aldevarian Narwhal, which is honestly as easy as ever. We just need to wait until he eats us and then take down the Shadow Phase's shield. We've defeated the Aldevarian Narwhal, and that means Act 5 is over. That means we beat Genshin Impact using only Mika. That was probably one of the most infuriating and boring solo challenges I've ever done. Mika's damage output was so low for the entire playthrough that battles that were normally trivial became a bit more of an annoyance, and that made stuff like the Ruin Guard in Mondstadt Act 2 and, for some reason, the Pyro Gun guy a lot more annoying and difficult than usual. Also, don't forget my Mika pretty much had to be built physically because of how little cryo damage we can do overall, so a lot of fights were just left-click simulator, which was quite the opposite of engaging gameplay. I may still really dislike it, but without his healing burst, we would have died a lot more. On the tier list of difficulty, I'm placing this at the bottom of hard, and on the solo tier list, he's going in not good. The kind of difficult tier and the hard tier when it comes to solo challenges are kind of reserved for characters that either aren't DPSs or can't ascend for a while, and Mika 1000% falls into the former category. If you're going to use Mika, don't unless you either like him or are using him in a physical team. I actually don't know what my next challenge will be because I'm taking a little bit of a break. I won't be gone for that long, but I'll probably still be playing the challenges on my break because I still enjoy doing that. So really, you'll probably barely tell I was on a break. But until then, I'll leave you with that.